Well, with us again for another round of Robert's Rules, we have Joan Millivan, part of the Robert's Rules Study Club. Hi, Joan. How are you?
Hi, Ken.
Good
nice
to see you. Also on the JRF board. So she practices this weekly, daily.
Daily.
Yeah,
well, almost
an
daily.
awful lot.
Yeah.
So what we're going to talk about today, a couple different things. The main topic is amendments. Am I right?
That's right.
Yes. So we often hear this if anybody watches the board meetings, and quite often it gets a little bit convoluted only because I think a lot of people don't quite understand that, first of all, a vote is taken and it has to be mentioned we're voting on the amendment and
Right.
then to the resolution and so on, right?
Yeah.
And there can be amendments on top of amendments, and so
Yes.
so let's talk about the first topic, the first subject here.
Well, the purpose of an amendment is to clarify, I would say, for the most part, and it modifies the wording and within limits sometimes the meaning of a main motion. The construction of an amendment is pretty specific. You know, you can't just say, "Well, I want to amend this motion to include highways." Well,
Yeah.
you have to say exactly what word you want to
Right.
change. I mean, really exactly. So you say, I'm going to take out the word and after the word schools or something like that, so that you're very specific about how you modify
Okay.
the amendment, the motion.
Now, the purpose of amendments on the next slide here is, as you said, you should say exactly where in the main motion is to change and precisely what words to use. You can't be sort of ambivalent about it.
It can't be too general.
Yeah.
You know? You have some specific wording in front of you, and if you don't say what it is exactly that you want to change, then it's not really an amendment. It's just an idea out there.
Oh, okay.
So-
Now on the next slide, construction of amendments, put an amendment together, word by word directions to the secretary. Okay.
Right.
Right?
And sometimes the amendments are so long that it would be best to write them out. Usually we just change a word here and there, but sometimes we have entire paragraphs to put together. And when that happens, you definitely should have it written out.
Okay. All right. And there's certainly been times over the years that sometimes the amendments got so lengthy or changed it so much that quite often they'll make a determination, well, maybe this should go back to the committee.
Exactly.
Because right now what we're doing is tearing apart the motion so much that you're almost starting from scratch again.
Right, and that can happen, and you don't want that to happen.
Right, because that goes far beyond what you would consider an amendment.
That's editing.
Yes, exactly. So on the next slide, it talks about the chair's position when these amendments happen, you know, what they should be doing, right?
Yes, and the chair has a special position. They want to remind the group that you're only voting on the amendment. And then they should read the main motion as it would be with the amendment, and then repeat that we're voting on these words only, or this paragraph only. And each amendment's voted on separately. So you can make, usually it's 2 maximum, that to pass, but let's go ahead because I'll explain that a little bit further.
Okay, so let's go to the next slide, basic rules for amendments.
Okay, so you can insert words.
Okay.
I move to insert the words, and you say specifically what the words are and where they belong.
Yes.
Or you can strike out words, and again, say exactly which words are being struck out. And notice the motion is, I move to strike out the words, whatever they are.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of, I want to make an amendment to, it is an amendment when you say, I move to strike out. And sometimes you strike out words and then insert other words. And so that's, you know, we're going to take the and out and put a but in, or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now amending paragraphs, and this is inserting or adding an entire paragraph, am I right?
Right, or taking out.
Yeah.
Similar to words. but sometimes whole paragraphs have to be changed. And maybe one whole paragraph just doesn't belong there, so you take it out. Move to strike paragraphs that begins with and ends with, and then, or you want to insert a paragraph, the same thing.
Right.
Now, the one that's a little tricky is substituting, and I move to substitute for the pending motion the following, and then you state the paragraph or section, or sometimes it's a whole article that you're putting in just for clarification for that motion. We don't have to do that usually with the boards, but sometimes in some cases they can do this.
Okay. So amending amendments.
Oh, yes.
And this is where it gets confusing, I think.
Well, it can be, and again, amending an amendment is simply to clarify something, but if it gets too sticky, it would be better to vote down the amendment to the amendment, and maybe even the amendment, and start over again.
Okay. Now, this is not the same as having, if we go back a little bit, that a resolution or whatever it might be may have a maximum of 2 amendments, but within there you can be amending the amendment.
Yeah, well, let me explain. It is a little tricky. Once you've made an amendment and there may be a secondary amendment to it, you have to vote on each part. You have to vote on the secondary amendment first, and then you vote on the amendment as amended. And if that all passes, then you vote on the motion as amended.
Okay.
And in each case, the chairman has to say how it's going to be. So it gets a little complicated. Then after you've done all that and you're voting on this new amended main motion, you can make another amendment during the debate.
Okay.
So then you can start all over again. We try not to do that.
Okay. So again, we were just talked about amending amendments. Now, sticking to the subject. Amendments must in some way involve the original question.
Exactly. You can't amend an amendment that has nothing to do with tennis, for example, and say you're going to talk about football.
Right.
You have to stick to the subject
of
the amendment. And with the First Amendment, you have to stick to the subject of the main motion.
Right. And we've seen that several times in the board meetings, where someone will bring up kind of like a subject, as you said. You may be talking about the tennis courts, and somebody will say, well, I also think that we should do this for the golf course. And no.
It's off topic.
That's a whole nother motion in another time.
And the chair usually calls them back in and said, no, you're off topic.
Yeah, exactly. So the settled rule. Okay.
Once the amendments are all in place and the board has voted on something, then it's settled, and no other amendments can be introduced. The motion is passed.
Yes, exactly.
Boom, you're done.
Yeah.
And there are other rules for changing motions, but not with amendments at this point.
Okay, all right. Now let's move on to something I think is probably a little easier to understand, is the treasurer's duties.
Oh,
right?
Yes. Okay, well, it seems pretty simple in Robert's rules, and it is, but our treasurers have a much more complicated position. Okay, the treasurer is responsible for keeping track of the money that's spent by the group, very simply put.
Yeah.
And each meeting, they make a report of what the bank account holds.
Right.
How much money we've gotten in, what we spent, and here's the balance.
Right.
So they keep track every month if it's a monthly meeting, and at the end of the year, they make a complete financial report about all the expenses, all the income and expenses for that group. In our case, we're handling much more money and many more complicated issues. So we're talking about reserves, and we are talking about expenses and income. We're talking about basically the same thing, but our treasurers really have to be much more aware of the whole picture of a corporation.
Right. Yeah, it's far more complicated than, say, you had a small board that was overseeing the PTA or a small library or something.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even just a club. And
right.
Quite often the treasurer is also responsible for collecting dues.
Right.
Which we don't do on the boards. I mean, the assessments are
Yeah.
coming in regularly, but the treasurer doesn't collect them.
Right, exactly. So at the meeting, the treasurer is required to give a report, right?
And it's very simple, as I say, in most cases.
Yeah, I mean, even with the boards, it's pretty simple.
It's pretty simple. It's you know, these have been the expenses for the month. This is the income for the month, and this is our balance. That's
Right.
basically what they're telling you.
Yeah, exactly. And year to date, that sort of thing.
Year to date.
Now, audits, and this is a good subject because just recently we had the audit
We just
for
had
2016.
an audit for, right, exactly. So once a year, the treasurer's reports or the annual report is audited as to accuracy and how it's been put together and so on. So our annual report, which you've already received as residents, in the short form has been audited and reported to be fine.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
so this is the check by an outside firm to make sure that everything's on the up and up. Now, the thing with clubs and so on, we don't have audits in clubs. Maybe we'll put together a small audit committee of our
Yeah.
own to just to check things.
Yeah,
But usually
exactly.
that's not done, and it depends on the group.
Right, exactly. So your next meeting is coming up on May 13th, and it's going to be at the Towers at the Key Club Room at 9 o'clock, right?
And Cy Wellickson is going to be our presenter.
All right, very good. For more information, you can call Mike Straziuso at 949-830-8717, as you see on the screen there. And I know we'll probably hear from you next month, am I
Next
right?
month. Oh, yes.
All right.
One of us, anyway.
One of you, anyway. Good to see you, Joan, as
Thank you.
always. You
Thanks
take
so
care.
much, Ken.
Thank you, and we'll be right back.